with Frank Fabozzi. I'm Frank Fabozzi. My guest today is Mohammed El-Erian, who is the Chief Economic Advisor at Allianz, which is the corporate parent of PIMCO. And at PIMCO, he served as the CEO and co-chief investment officer from 2007 to 2014. He served as President Obama's chair for the council, the Global Development Council. He's a columnist for Bloomberg View, a contributing editor to the Financial Times, a frequent guest on CNBC, CNN, Bloomberg, BBC, and Fox Television. He's also the author of 2 New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling books. The first was When Markets Collide, published in 2008, which won the Financial Times Goldman Sachs Book of the Year and was named by The Economist as one of the best business books of all times. His second book, published in 2016, called The Only Game in Town, Central Banks Instability and Avoiding the Next Collapse, was named by Inc. as one of the, to quote, 25 of the most inspiring books everyone should read. Welcome, Mohammed.
Thank you. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here with you, Frank.
Thank you. How are you coping with the lockdown?
You know, it was hard to begin with. I think like everybody else, the family felt that it was taken out violently from its comfort zone. But with time, we've all adjusted. And we're just hoping that this period passes and that we can all return to a healthy and full life.
Yeah. Well, yeah, hopefully it'll pass. I know you're a big Jets fan. Oops, I made a mistake, didn't I? I know you're a big Jets fan. I know you tweet frequently during the games and with some interesting people, I might add. How do you grade the Jets GM in their selection of their draft selection last week? And how do you think there will be a football season this year?
So to respond to the first one, I will give you first an analytical response and an emotional response. Analytical, our first 2 choices in particular, I thought were brilliant. We gave up 52 sacks last year, so it was good to have a proper offensive lineman come in. And secondly, I think we picked up a really good wide receiver. That's the analytical side, Frank. Now, let me tell you about reality. The history of the Jets is it doesn't matter who we have. We lose anyway. We don't manage people well. We don't coach people well. So I'm hoping this year that I will not go through my usual cycle of getting all excited and then being let down in a big way. As to whether we're going to have a season, I don't know. I sure hope so. I suspect that if we do have a season, it will be different. It may be somewhat different in timing, but it certainly will be different in terms of when we watch it on TV, how does it feel? Because I don't think we're going to go back to full stadiums for a while.
Okay. Well, moving off sports to your background, you've worked for large asset management firms and beneficial owners like Harvard. Could you share experiences that you've had with both and similarities, differences?
So the big similarity is that I was privileged to work with really smart people who were focused on a mission I could buy in very easily. At Harvard, it was to make sure that we generated high returns so that the university could continue to provide top education to as many people as possible, regardless of socioeconomic background. And at PIMCO, it was about managing the retirement funds, the savings of millions of people around the world. So the missions were similar, and certainly the level of expertise and smarts was very high. Where they differed is scale. One was 30 billion, one was 2 trillion. And where they differed also was in the amount of client work. At Harvard, you had one client, the university. And at PIMCO, you had many, many clients that you had an obligation to keep informed.
Okay. How about your role as chair of the Global Development Council? What was it like working for the government machine?
So these presidential councils bring together people from the outside. So we're not part of government, but we interact with government. And the idea is that you bring people who supplement what the government is doing and seeing, and bring an outside perspective. And I had again the privilege of chairing President Obama's Global Development Council. So we looked at development issues at a time when development was evolving. This notion of going beyond aid, because a lot of developing countries could raise money. So you no longer needed aid, just aid, you also needed many other things. And it was a wonderful experience. You get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of government. And you get to see how hard it is to coordinate within the government. The interagency process in government is a very complex one.
Well, your first book, When Markets Collide, I assume it was your first, was published in 2008, which meant, I don't know how quickly you write, but it meant that probably you started in 2006, 2007, and you completed the book for publication in 2008. If you were asked by your publisher to revise that book, what would you say now?
So ironically, I wouldn't revise very much about that book in terms of explaining why it was we were heading towards a financial crisis. The book, When Markets Collide, was all about over-reliance on finance, and in particular, over-reliance on private factories of credit and leverage. And it was warning that this process was unsustainable. What I would revise is less about the crisis and more about the aftermath of the crisis. I think a lot of us made the assumption, and it's not just in economics and finance, it's also made in politics and geopolitics, that if you win the war, that's a necessary and sufficient condition for winning the peace, for securing the peace. And what we realized coming out of the global financial crisis is that securing the peace was going to be hard work. And we didn't do a very good job of it. So yes, we won a war against a finance-driven risk of a global depression, but we failed to secure the peace of high, sustainable, and inclusive growth. And because of that, Frank, we entered this crisis in a very fragile situation with the wrong initial conditions. And I really worry that we may repeat that mistake.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. That was one of the questions I was going to pose later on, the expression, your view on that, winning the war and the inability or the difficulty of securing the peace. My recollection is that, well, we know that there were some observers during the global financial crisis who saw signs that that there would be long-term consequences, which would result in advanced economies being locked into a low growth rate for a long period of time. In about May of 2009, I remember you came up with the phrase, the new normal. And I think you did that in about 2009. You actually went public with that. Everybody was using that statement. The global financial crisis supported what you said, and it gained widespread acceptance. Next, other economists, I won't identify them, came up with other terms like the new mediocre or secular stagnation. And, well, it was incredibly insightful. The question is now, once this pandemic crisis, by the way, I think it was in 2008, you also said that Americans should say goodbye to the new normal. And in fact, you attributed the demise to the inherent contradictions of the paradigm. After this pandemic crisis passes, hopefully soon, what will be the new normal?
So we're going to have a new normal. And let me explain how we get here. You're absolutely right. we were lucky enough at PIMCO to have managed through the crisis